this got my own wife super fired up. The idea that you could be a transgender woman, right? That you could be born a man and then you end up in a position where you decide to become a woman and then you get named as the Woman of the Year or one of them. This is from USA Today. They have named Rachel Levine one of USA Today's Women of the Year. This is part of their Women of the Century project. And it is Admiral Rachel Levine, who is, what is her official title, Buck, in the Biden administration?
Well, I believe it would be his official title.
Yes.
His official title would be...
I can't even keep up anymore. Is it Health and Human Services?
Yeah.
Head of the U.S. Public Health Service
Assistant
Commission.
Secretary for Health for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and the head of the U.S. Public Health Service Commissioned Corps.
This is just such a... By the way, we've got the swimmer from UPenn this week is competing to try to become the greatest women's swimmer of all time, the man.
Yeah.
And I just... If you're a woman... And
How is
you
this
are
not
named,
offensive?
Yeah, that's what I'm
How
saying.
is this not offensive, Clay?
My wife says that it is.
Not a woman getting a women's or women's
of the year
award. I mean, at what point do people... First of all, the fact that feminists go along with this just goes to show you that they are bitter Marxists. They don't actually stand for women. They just want power, and they want some way to explain why they're so unhappy with their life choices. And with this, they just go along with the hive mind of the left, which is essentially erasing women. I mean, I always see our friends over at the Daily Wire, Matt Walsh among them, will say all he wants is for the left to define what a woman is.
Yes.
And they get furious, and it's because they refuse to define what a woman is.
Here's what the point that I just keep making, and I would encourage everybody else out there to make it. You remember, Buck, Rachel Dolezal? The woman who was white that became the head of the NAACP.
This created a discussion about transracial.
Yeah, right. It was, according to left-wingers, super racist and unacceptable for a white woman to identify as a black woman. Unacceptable. Absolutely, absurdly racist, we were told, in order for Rachel Dolezal to make that choice. Yet, for everybody out there listening, if you had to change your gender or change your race, which do you think would be a more substantial alteration in your life? And how is it that changing your gender is heroic, yet changing your race is super racist? Nobody can ever explain to me how that dichotomy exists, because it seems to me that changing your race, if we're going to argue that it's brave and courageous and worthy of popular acclaim, it seems to me that the standard you apply should be the same.
I mean, there's also Shaun King.
Oh, yeah, of course.
This is from the Daily Beast. Here's the headline quote. The mother of Tamir Rice calls Shaun King, quote, a white man acting black, end quote. Shaun King was a BLM.
Is he still super active on social media?
Activist. He was. I don't know if he is anymore, but he was also someone who, well, you know, it
appeared to be a white guy pretending to be black.
I mean, the claim was that he made is that later on in life, his mother told him that his father was a very light-skinned black man. But I mean, this also raises the whole, the conversation about gender is a very straightforward biological reality. Yes. And anyone who wants to do the what about intersex conversation, I say, great, let's have that conversation. There's usually one dominant structure, family show, and that's what but that's not what transgenderism is about. Transgender individuals are not intersex biologically. They are emotionally and psychologically transgender. It is not a physical manifestation. Put that aside for a second, though. Race is actually, anyone who's done 23andMe, I mean, race can be a much more complicated and multivariable thing than gender, to be sure, right? You could have a mother who is biracial and a father who's biracial, and then, what do you identify as at that point? And what is your, it's a much more interesting and nuanced discussion, but because of identity politics, they pretend that it's actually black and white, to borrow a phrase.
The data reflects from that 23andMe that around 25% of all black, and I'm putting black in quotation marks, DNA is actually European. And that nearly 50% of much of Hispanic DNA, and a Hispanic is in quotation marks again, is often European as well. So this idea that race is a clear-cut delineation and that there's a massive difference is oftentimes not true for anyone who has gone out and gotten their DNA analyzed to see where your lineage may have arisen.
I had a roommate in college who he would always make jokes about this, that he would say that he could pass for any number of, and he could. I mean, he had I think he had a father. He was kind of, you know, part Jewish, part Asian, part Latino. I mean, he had all these things. And you could see this guy and say, what if someone said, what is his race? Yeah. It would be, you know, you say, I mean, there's a whole bunch of things going on here we could talk about, you know, and isn't this wonderful? We're all one human race is the actual conclusion here. But on gender, every woman in the locker room with that swimmer at UPenn knows that that's a guy.
Yes, that's right. And for anyone out there who is listening to us right now, if you had to make the decision, if you're going to change your race or your gender, which one do you think would be more substantially altering of your life? You mentioned somebody who's got a large number of different racial backgrounds. Tiger Woods. Remember, he famously called himself the Kablan Asian because he had all these different ethnic backgrounds all rolled into him, one of the greatest golfers in the history of the world. It would be far easier for the vast majority of people out there to decide to identify as a different race than it would be to decide to change your gender. Yet again, and this is one of those things where when you push left-wingers on this, I've never heard a good example, a good argument of why changing your gender isn't far more significant than changing your race and why they're treated so inherently differently.
And, I mean, also it's clear that there's identity politics at work in this in terms of the narrative. I mean, for example, and people will say, I mean, you know, Kamala Harris, they'll say is the first black female vice president. Fine. You much less frequently hear, though, she's also the first South Asian female vice president. And I think it's worth asking, I mean, why do we hear that so much
heritage
less?
Not matter? Yeah, no, it's an interesting point. And I think it's emblematic of the upside down world we live in, where USA Today is naming this man as one of the women of the year. It's very, very strange.
Major media organizations are literally naming men as women of the year. This is what wokeness is in 2022, everybody. If you wanted an encapsulation of it, there you have it. So.
And the greatest swimmer in college history could be a man this week with what's going on at the UPenn swimming championships down at Georgia Tech.